Hello and welcome to the Analysis Mason podcast. My name is Christopher Baugh. I'm a partner at Analysis Mason, and I head up our space research practice here within the company. Now, we do a number of podcasts, and we're big fans of big topics. And we've got a big topic today, like we're always apt to do. And this big topic is about sovereignty in space, something we within our group, formerly NSR, all the way through to now, have focused on. We'll define this topic. It's a big topic. We'll analyze a bit kind of what's happening and hopefully give some recommendations behind it. So I want to introduce my speakers, some colleagues today, experts in the field of space sovereignty and public sort of government spend. First is Dallas Kasaboski. Dallas is a principal analyst within our team and runs quite a number of our high value programs. So Dallas, welcome.
Thanks, Chris.
And Alex Park as well. Alex is a senior analyst, and importantly, he is the lead of our Defense and Sovereign Space program, which sits squarely on this topic. Alex, also welcome to the program.
Cheers, Chris.
All right, Jen. So we're covering a topic. It's a big topic. I tell the story of we produce a breakfast briefing every year in DC. We ask for the key topics from clients. This was one of the top 4 topics, unquestionably, along with other things like data centers in space. But sovereignty has so much overhang in space right now and what governments are doing. So before we get into the nitty gritty, as they say, can you just define what that means for those who are maybe new to the topic? What does sovereignty in space actually mean?
Sovereignty is a term we've heard a lot of, especially in the last 6 months. It's basically about governments and militaries around the world pushing toward ownership within the satellite environment. So independence, access, ownership in space. We've seen this trend before, and now sovereignty is those different agencies wanting to own and operate and control within the space environment.
And also to just kind of to further add to that, it's something which is quite important to note. It will vary and differ from country to country and region to region about what is important to them. I think one of the core and crucial aspects of the term sovereignty is actually about resiliency. It's making sure that your capability has redundancies. If your traditional access was to ever go down, like you've got a backup and a fall on for if that goes. And this is especially the case for your more essential capabilities.
Yeah,
Okay.
So like the definition: resiliency, independence, access, control within space. This is nothing new, but there's a lot of activity right now of governments and militaries investing and pushing toward this. As economies change, as geopolitics change, we're just seeing an increased foothold from governments and militaries around the world.
Okay, so this is really the big question, and we get this question a lot from clients. But this market, so governments and militaries buying space solutions infrastructure, has been in place for quite a long time. You think of not just the U.S. and other countries, but this has been a big thing, and it's kind of reached an inflection point, say, in the last few years. And all politics aside, thinking hard, why now? Why is it the SpaceX effect? What is it that is driving governments to have they want their own capabilities and the word term sovereignty?
Yeah. SpaceX is there's a SpaceX effect that's happening. So during our breakfast briefing, recently, we talked about some of the trends that are driving this direction. Geopolitics is one. Relationships are changing, and even if we focus on the positive, there are countries that are raising their profiles and coming into this industry or wanting to, and that's changing how we do business in space. Security is another, either for maintaining the resiliency that Alex mentioned or using space to enhance security aspects. Economics, space is a marketplace, and governments see that and are trying to increase commercialization within their own domains, within their own countries. And supply chain, SpaceX, Starlink, Amazon, mega constellations, launch capability. There is a really very strong push at scaling and controlling the flow of access to materials and technologies in the market. And all of this is driving forward and folding under the umbrella of governments needing to have control of that pipeline in order to develop the capabilities that they see as important for their resiliency.
Alex, you cover it as well from your angle. I mean, I'm sure you, as head of this program, must have this question, why? And kind of ties into another theme, which maybe is a good segue. Some concern this is a bubble. some concern this is the latest fad in space. We're all and I hesitate to bring the term up, which is orbital data centers, the nice, buzzy, flashy, seemingly bottomless pit of investment going towards it. But sovereignty, governments don't do well at long range planning and investing. It's usually year to year, and we know how that works. So is this a bubble? Is that in the why and the should we get excited about this long term?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's also one of those funny things at the minute where we're very much at the forefront of its in terms of its main manifestation right now, and it's taking various different forms. And I've been asked this numerous times by numerous people, and even when asking them what is their opinion of kind of what is going on, it changes from person to person in terms of the aspect and how they define the sovereign terminology. But I don't think it's really a new bubble or I mean, I guess you can say it's a new fad, but it's a term that has been obviously mentioned for the last couple of years now, and kind of more and more countries kind of saying like, due to various events happening in either Ukraine or what may be happening out in the world, it's causing them to start to realize, oh, maybe we should start to think about our own capabilities here. And it's something which I think recent geopolitical, posturing, maneuvering events in the world in the last, 5 to 6 months has really started to exacerbate the sovereign needs and sovereign calls. But it's something which I think has been maturing or, festering for a little while and is really going to start to I'd say at least for the next 10 on years, it will be carrying on. It may not be as exaggerated as it is now, but I think it is here to stay. It is this sovereign call, but it's more, I think the important aspect is looking into kind of, how sovereignty is manifesting in different countries and different regions. And there's predominantly kind of, I'd say, four major pillars in which that's happening. So one being ownership of either assets or infrastructure. It could be guaranteeing service access, making sure you're partnering with regional or local service providers to make sure that a foreign entity cannot have sway over your access to capability, creating a robust supply chain. So I think that's even more evident due to the recent conflict in Iran, is that impact on kind of, global trade routes, is making sure that you are a little bit more resilient to those shock factors, and so that, your capability development pipelines aren't delayed even further. And then the final aspect of that, which is obviously what we saw following the Ukraine conflict, is the securing access to space. Now, this is kind of starting to manifest through native launch capabilities. So what's being seen out in Canada, or even being seen out in, say, for example, Sweden.
Interesting. So both, I'm contending here. I'm just kind of a hypothesis. You both contend this is the biggest gripe of the commercial industry of governments not committing long term to military, government, whatever public sector entity, to the commercial industry. And it seems as if this momentum is more than it's ever been, right, to this long range commitment of governments, whether collectively or individually, curing or starting a space strategy. Would you agree this is a
Yeah.
resilient, as we say, resilient theme?
Yeah, and just to combine a couple of the topics we've covered already, let's imagine a different scenario where it's a few years ago, there's no any kind of geopolitical shakeup, the news is quite boring. We already see some of the same trends that are pushing toward this expansion. We saw them in the commercial market where for years there were primes and there were prime manufacturers, prime vendors, prime launch providers. And as the industry grew and developed, more players came, more competition. Think of something like GPS. The world uses a global positioning system in everything we do. But as things improved, different regions and countries decided we should have our own. And as that continued, commercial players thought maybe there's an opportunity for us to also have our own and provide some kind of competitive alternative. So we're seeing all of those trends pushing now, and combined with everything Alex just said, where governments need reliability, they need resilient communications, they need to make sure that they're receiving data, imagery, etc. Navigational data, of course. They need to push their own agendas of promoting their capabilities and their economies. And yes, governments and militaries have been kind of the birth of the industry, and they've always represented a fairly strong buy-in. But now they're shifting back toward wanting to own and operate, or at least buy and somewhat control assets and infrastructure. And I think where we are in terms of the wave, where we are right now, we're in the buying phase. We're in the building the infrastructure in the early phase. And long term, even if geopolitics calms down, countries want to push to be more competitive. They want their commercial players to be more capable and competitive. So all of these, we're paving the roads essentially right now toward a more competitive space environment. It just happens to be focused where a lot of the budget is right now from government agencies and military capabilities.
Sure. And I think there are a number of things below the curve we want to focus on now. One of them I want to go back to, it's kind of a curveball for both of you. And I want to think about, not to be a cynic, but just to introduce the theme. And when we speak, or I speak with clients, a lot of times they reference SpaceX and they reference the big becoming potentially the biggest. We're on the cusp of an IPO coming up in the next month or two. And I've the theme, and how strong is this theme driving it, driving sovereignty of, and I use the term loosely, alternatives to SpaceX. And it seems as if there is an overwhelming, overarching position amongst many in the industry that it's a very unhealthy position to have one single behemoth controlling so much. We need to, example, launch Dallas, which is perhaps arguably the biggest bottleneck to all of this. Maybe Alex, you're thinking in some of the themes that you're looking at, is that something that you see? It's kind of that we need to have a diversity, plethora of options, including our
Well,
own.
so it's very interesting you kind of take this point and ask this question. I think it's a very, very valid one, but kind of backtracking a little bit to what you just said about kind of, how defense is kind of going about its kind of procurement and stuff like that. Finally, the industry has been, wanting this call for a while for defense to shake up how it goes about procurement. And I think, especially within the space domain, with how quickly commercial technologies are developing, the traditional way that defense is procured is really starting to crumble and starting to actually shape up. And what I mean by that is they're moving away from their kind of, long-lasting procurement where they only go to one or two defense primes, and over that period, money's getting wasted away. Capability kind of requirements change over that long duration, being 10 years. You might see 3 years down there, you want a whole new capability because the world's evolving so quickly, and therefore program get scrubbed. But we're already seeing that, especially within the US, how with Golden Dome, how they're approaching Golden Dome through their procurement vehicles there, the Shield procurement vehicle and the MAA procurement vehicle, the name, at least the two main ones, that they're trying to approach it where they're opening up to a whole list of vendors. So rather than going through one or two defense primes, have now said, right, we want at least 2,000 to 3,000 companies within the space ecosystem to be ready for us just to pounce upon and say, can you engage with your technology? Can you provide this capability here at the click of a finger and kind of say, right, we want to rapidly buy this? And that's really exciting for the space industry as a whole, because it means that before you were gate locked by the fact you didn't know what the capability requirements were because of the security clearance levels, and only the defense primes were privy to that information. Now that's being opened up more. The barriers to entry are lowering into defense, and it means that innovation can really start to excel. So I think kind of then answering your SpaceX question is that yes, maybe there's a kind of monopoly going on there just due to economies of scale and the circumstances of the last couple of years that has propelled the company. But I do think that is not going to bottleneck the space industry, especially when it comes to entering into government and defense markets. I actually think the vice versa. It's going to become a flourishing market with many players able to get involved and play fine. The large ticket items may go towards your traditional vendors, but there's going to be more opportunities under there for the small fish to get involved in.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that the vendor side of things is seeing stronger appetite. They're seeing more investment. We were tracking just satellite manufacturing and launch investment last year for governments and militaries, and it grew from about 4 billion annually to about 7 or 8 billion. Plus a number of acquisitions happened that were related. So the investment itself in new technologies, mobile satellites, refueling for military satellites, things like this is all increasing. However, where governments and militaries are going to run into a problem is that the technology and the market doesn't move. It has not had this support mechanism as strongly in the past and doesn't move as quickly. Governments are setting up these new procurement schemes to embrace a wider industry, and of course that brings risk, and that brings maybe a fractured, potential fracturing of the approach. But at the end of the day, going back to your SpaceX question, you can support as many new launchers as you wish, there still happens to be one who is owning 50% of the industry and is ready today. So any kind of wish to diversify or to break up a monopoly will require time. And depending on the needs that you have will kind of determine how strongly you put a fine line on sovereignty. Speaking about launch, if you wish, there are European players, for example, who are supporting European launch efforts in the hope to kind of break up the monopoly, but they still need their satellites to fly. And if there's no European provider available, they look to SpaceX. So just some challenges there to go alongside that opportunity.
Of course. It's I think SpaceX as an inspiration more than anything, really, and also you can't replicate that model. But again, the opportunity is bigger; it's sustained. You've said this is not a short term thing. This isn't just the cyclical nature of government spend up and down. This is a sustained. So let's in the last time we have together, focus on the industry, what this means for the industry going forth, how much audit, how much opportunity assessment, how much we're seeing investment realm, we're seeing public sort of market entrance of the Voyagers, the others going to this world, York gobbling up companies almost weekly these days. Talk a little bit about what this means for the industry, about the opportunity, and what, secondarily, and last time, some recommendations maybe we can provide. Sort of, as I say, the free advice section of the podcast.
Yeah, a couple of ideas spring to mind. I mean, I'll jump around a little bit. Regarding what you just said about acquisitions, there is a widespread hunger for new technologies. That is driven by competition to stand out, but that is driven from demand as well, from governments wanting to and militaries wanting to develop and demonstrate new technologies and new capabilities in orbit, to be first, to be ahead. So we're likely going to see a lot of that in the industry, where somebody with a new idea, very ambitious, very different, if it can find any crossover application with government military interests, that is a positive. So if you don't have a strategy for enticing or engaging with the government military market, you're going to be missing out on a very strong part of the industry. And unfortunately, it's very challenging to do both. It's challenging to serve government military customers as well as commercial. They have very different, you have to have a very different approach.
So, Alex, maybe from your lens as leading this program, maybe from the lens of some of the things you're working, I know you lead the themes and direct the research, but also some pretty extensive database building that we've been kind of building a monitoring value add to. From that lens, when you think about recommendations to industry and where value can be added, what kind of perspectives and hopefully some recommendations you can make?
Yeah, certainly. I think one of the crucial things, especially with this, as going back to what I mentioned very early on in our chat today, is the fact that sovereignty and the definition of it is differing from country to country and region to region. We're starting to see that manifest a little bit in the way, how procurement's being done by certain countries, how there, several countries, Germany, Australia, France have all mentioned extensive spending programs they're wanting to be doing into space capabilities for defense. And part of that is going to be going into a indigenous workforce to be able to build a indigenous space capability. That kind of, again, going back to that supply chain. But so it will vary. And my point here being is that I think companies need.
Looks like he was overwhelmed with ideas.
Overrun with ideas, and we may have lost Alex. So, Dallas, maybe you could finish.
Yeah, he'll probably come in and
working.
interrupt me, but Alex has been working on, as you mentioned, we're tracking a lot of this information, new contracts, programs, how things are shaping and developing, and who's spending, where, and why. We're doing a lot of work on that to understand the landscape. We're also seeing the advice of performing audits. Too often we see companies have these grand ambitions, and then it turns out that key technologies or supply or components, something a part of the process, the pillars that Alex mentioned earlier, is not looked into early enough. And then all of a sudden it's tied up in a foreign market, or it's a capability you do not have and it's too expensive to get. So we recommend for vendors to develop new ideas, to perform an audit from the beginning as to what you need and when, make partnerships and try to build resiliency again within your own supply chain. And for governments and militaries, you have to simultaneously push the market forward, but be a bit patient as it works to develop the capabilities of tomorrow.
Sure. It's an impressive and resilient theme here. And I file it under the big theme, which is space is mainstream. It's mainstream for consumers. We have it on our handsets now with direct to device. It's coming everywhere. You mentioned GPS, and now for governments, it's becoming quite ubiquitous in terms of sovereignty and capabilities. So quite a good theme. And again, the suppliers in the industry, I'm hoping, are rubbing their hands thinking about the opportunity and the RFPs that are across their desks. With that, that will conclude the podcast. Thank you for listening. I want to thank Dallas and Alex for their insights. Got a tremendous more of content, insights, data on this topic on our website. Feel free, analysismason.com. And if you like the podcast, we do this quite often. Subscribe as well on the website. So thank you, Dallas. Thank you, Alex. Thanks to our audience. See you on the next podcast.